This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. And my name is Josh Strickland. I'm your host today here on this Thursday edition of the GSMC Podcast, and we have passed the 2-week mark of with no sports. We are at day 15 or something like that. Who's keeping count, really? Hope you all are, getting over it. But my job, which is talking about sports, it's getting a little difficult. Not going to lie. NFL free agencies died down as expected. It was hot out the gate. I feel like a lot of teams were just bored because there was nothing else going on, and they wanted a big news of the day. So that's out of the realm of possibility now, because now we are here. And we are in week 3 of no sports, and we have nothing really to look forward to. So now we're getting into the opinionated part of this podcast. We're going to be very opinionated today. We have a couple things to talk about. We have no NBA stars in the 2021 Olympics, ? Who will make it out better if we don't have a college football season? We'll talk about Deshaun Watson's cryptic tweet that he tweeted out earlier this week, and then we'll talk about the NHL PA update, and then we'll talk about everyone's favorite Olympic sport that they didn't know was an Olympic sport, but it's a thing, netball. But first, we're going to start off Tom Brady. He left the New England Patriots to go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, who will have a better season? The New England Patriots with Bill Belichick and whoever they have at quarterback, or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Bruce Arians, Tom Brady, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, all those guys, all those cats. So, here's the interesting thing. My big issue with New England at this moment in time is who's going to be their quarterback. That is the big question. We haven't had to ask this question since 2011 when Tom Brady went out with a ACL injury. So, currently on their roster, they have Brian Hoyer, they have Jared Stidham, and they have one other guy that I can't think of at the moment, but they have a third quarterback. So Brian Hoyer, he's played in that system before. He was a backup to Tom Brady a long time ago, and as we all know, Cody Kessler was the third guy, by the way. But Brian Hoyer, he played in the Patriots system under Tom Brady. We all know how the Tom Brady or the Bill Belichick school of Tom Brady backups or whatever does outside of the Patriots. But now that he's back with the Patriots, Brian Hoyer, he wasn't terrible. He's not a terrible quarterback. He played fine for the Browns. He played fine for the Texans. He just doesn't have that oomph to kind of be a star quarterback. But playing with the New England Patriots could bring him back, bring him up to speed there. But the main thing is the Patriots probably don't have to worry about that, because the Patriots defense is still going to be really good next year. And also, I can't really doubt Bill Belichick. It's really a thing that I've learned in the past few years. You can't really doubt Bill Belichick. Now, they're coming in with one of the best scoring defenses, one of the best defenses in takeaways from last year, which of course there are going to be some pieces missing or changed there, but they pretty much locked down most of their secondary, I believe, with the McCourty twins, the McCourty brothers. So, I mean, they ranked 31st in opponent passing yards per game, which means that they gave up the second least passing yards per game. They gave up 95.5 rushing yards per game last year because they had a pretty stout defensive line. They led the league in interceptions by a large margin. They led with 25. The next best team was the Pittsburgh Steelers with 20. And then sacks, they're kind of in the middle of the pack. Passing touchdowns and passing interceptions. So the big issue with the Patriots last year was kind of the offense, actually. Tom Brady and that bare bones offense that I keep mentioning, where Julian Edelman is your number one receiver, which, by the way, Julian Edelman should never be your number one receiver. That's just a not good sign there. They got Mohamed Sanu in a trade halfway through the season. They had Antonio Brown at one point, and Mohamed Sanu was a disappointment, to say the least. Antonio Brown played pretty well for that one game, so well that Tom Brady liked him so much that Tom Brady wants him to come to Tampa Bay. So the Patriots, it's going to be an interesting year. It's going to fully depend on how Brian Hoyer or Jared Stidham, how they prepare, or wild card, if the Patriots pick up Cam Newton or Jameis Winston or one of those other guys, which I highly doubt they're going to pick up one of those guys, but that is definitely an option. Meanwhile, you have Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay last year was actually a pretty solid team, believe it or not. I mean, I think they finished third in the division, but they finished third in the division. They tied for second in the division. They went 7-9. The Falcons also went 7-9. The Saints went 13-3. And then you have the Panthers that went 5-11. So Tampa Bay actually had one of the best offenses last year, which is not a surprise. Jameis Winston threw for 5,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, and then also 30 interceptions. Of course, the 30 interceptions kind of killed them most of the year, but their offense is still going to be high-powered. It's going to require Tom Brady to kind of throw the ball down the field a little bit more, which is not what you are used to, honestly, because most of the time when I watch Tom Brady, I see him throw quick routes, quick outs, quick slants, stuff like that. So don't really see Tom Brady throw down the field that much. But what about Tampa Bay's defense? Well, Tampa Bay's defense is meh. Opponent passing yards per game in 2019, they had 270. They gave up 270. They gave up the least amount of rushing yards, though, by a large margin. They gave up 73.8 rushing yards per game, whereas the next team is the New York Jets, who gave up 86.9. So that's a huge jump right there. That's almost a 13 yards per game jump right there. The middle of the pack in interceptions, they're 12th. Sacks, they're up there. They're fifth in sacks from last year. So this defense is interesting, to say the least. I mean, they had Shaquille Barrett, who had 19 sacks. Not sure if he's still going to be with the team. Off the top of my head, I don't know if he's going to be with the team. But Tom Brady's going to have weapons. And I can't really remember the last time Tom Brady's had this many weapons on his team. Maybe since they had Randy Moss, maybe. Did they have Wes Welker and Randy Moss? I should know this, but you have Chris Godwin, you got Mike Evans, who are two really good receivers. Chris Godwin had 1,333 passing yards, receiving yards last year, and then Mike Evans. Mike Evans is, of course, one of those big body guys where you kind of just toss it up to him and he'll catch it more than likely. So it's going to be interesting to see how Tom Brady works within that system, works with these new weapons, and he's trying to get Antonio Brown to come in to Tampa as well. And my thing about this is I think Tampa Bay is going to make it out much better than New England is, mostly because New England, all they have to go is down. They still went 13-3 last year, or 12-4 last year, with a really bad offense. So they can win even with a bad offense, but that bad offense was led by Hall of Fame, 6-time Super Bowl champion Tom Brady. Now you have a bad offense led by Brian Hoyer, the Destroyer. Meanwhile, the Buccaneers, they go from a guy who threw 30 interceptions to a guy who's going to throw maybe like 5 or 6, which could change the whole landscape of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. However, you have the New Orleans Saints, who's already one of the most complete teams, and they get Drew Brees back for one more year. You have the Falcons, who just got Todd Gurley, so, I mean, their running game could be a little different. Matt Ryan is still a solid quarterback. We're not going to talk about the Panthers, because I honestly don't know what the hell the Panthers are going to look like next year. I mean, they got Teddy Bridgewater, and they got P.J. Walker, but I don't know what... They got good receivers, but I don't know what their defense is going to look like, so I'm not even going to include the Panthers in this discussion at the moment. But you still have the Saints. The Patriots, on the other hand, you have the Bills right on your heels there. The Bills got 10 wins last year. The Bills have a chance at getting back up, especially with Stephon Diggs on their team. They have a chance to actually jump the New England Patriots next year. So there could be a good chance that the Buccaneers are relegated to a wild card spot just because of the New Orleans Saints. There's a chance that New England can still win that division because I don't fully trust Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills just yet. So, if you look at it record-wise, I think the Buccaneers are going to make it out better. If you look at it as a division-wise and playoff seeding-wise, I think the Patriots are still going to win 11 or 12 games and win their division and probably make good in the playoffs. Maybe another first-round exit for them. Tampa Bay, on the other hand, it completely depends on who they play in the first round. But we'll have more discussions about this if we have a football season, which I really hope we do. God, please, sports, come back. When we return, we'll talk about if the Olympics are getting moved to 2021. Will we have NBA stars in those Olympics when we come back?
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So, as I mentioned on Tuesday's show, the Olympics are now being postponed to 2021 in Tokyo. The Tokyo Olympics getting pushed back to 2021. So because of this, it's kind of shaking up things for athletes, because some athletes were planning on making that trip this summer and stuff like that. So let's talk about the American team, the United States, as I live in the United States, so I'm going to care about the United States team more than any other team. So the Americans were intent on kicking down the door in Tokyo this summer. They were looking to reclaim global dominance in basketball after they placed seventh place in last year's World Cup by sending some of the NBA's brightest stars to go win Olympic gold. Then, on Tuesday, the Japanese government and Olympic organizers did what just about everyone expected them to do: postpone the games in the wake of this deadly coronavirus pandemic. That move, combined with the uncertainty of when the current NBA season will end, as well as the following one, seems likely to lead to fewer or no NBA players participating in the 2021 Summer Games. If Team USA wants to send a redeemed team to Tokyo, which that alliteration needs to chill right there. That's the redeemed team to Tokyo. That's not a fun thing to say. Well, it is fun to say. It's just hard to say. The redeeming of America's basketball reputation on a global stage might have to be done by G Leaguers, college kids, Americans who play overseas, and maybe some NBA players whose teams didn't make a 16-team playoffs at home. So, Jerry Colangelo, who's the Team USA managing director, said he'll cross that bridge when that information comes to him from the NBA. The 2019-20 NBA season is suspended right now due to coronavirus, as everybody knows. What remains to be seen is will the league return to the court this summer to finish? The NBA would like to, if at all possible, crown a champion, because you would like to crown a champion in sports. Even if there are no fans in the stands, there's too much TV money at stake, which, by the way, the first sporting event that is going to come back, first actual sporting event, no offense to Australian football, which was on last weekend, but then they stopped because coronavirus. But no offense to those sports, but if one of the big sports, basketball, baseball, football, or hockey, even hockey, I believe, if any of these leagues start playing on TV, even with empty fans, they're going to get ratings out the wazoo just because no one has anything else to do. So what if the NBA returns to action sometime this summer and plays into August or even September? And what if the following season doesn't start until sometime around Christmas, as we discussed in Tuesday's episode? I mean, the possible scenarios for the NBA season. In that scenario, the NBA season probably wouldn't end until much later in the summer, like August, which would conflict with the Olympics. There is no known date for the Tokyo Olympics in 2021, but for discussion purposes, they were supposed to start this summer on July 24th. If that date or something close to it were to hold for 2021, the NBA 2021 season didn't start until Christmas. There is no way Team USA could reasonably expect to field a roster with any players from playoff teams, either because their pro seasons would still be ongoing or because they literally just walked off the court after 82 games and a disappointing playoff loss, which I feel like if you're walking off the court with a disappointing playoff loss, you would love to go play for an easy gold medal, or maybe not so easy now, but a pretty easy, at least a medal. So Colangelo mentioned that he's hit the pause button for 1 year on the plans we were already making. Until we get information that changes that, who really knows what to expect? We're on pause, on standby. So for a bit of a history lesson here, Team USA has used NBA players for every major global competition. Global competition since 1992, dating to Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, the Dream Team. Golds were won from 92 to 2000. There was one exception to this, which is 1998. In 2002, the program stumbled to sixth-place finish at the World Championships, similar to today's World Cup, and consecutive third-place finishes at the 2004 Olympics and 2006 World Championships. The disappointing, embarrassing showings by American NBA players led to a reshaping of Team USA under Colangelo's leadership, and in 2008, the Redeem Team, with Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and others, reclaimed Olympic gold. The Americans maintained their dominance at the Olympics and World Cup until last summer, when Team USA's entire wishlist roster of bona fide stars skipped out on China, and the American team suffered its worst ever finish at a major championship, which is 7th, as I mentioned earlier. 31 of 35 players on Colangelo's initial list for Team USA said no for a variety of reasons, including not wanting to commit to Team USA for consecutive summers. Kemba Walker, Donovan Mitchell were the only players on the team who could possibly have been considered stars, and would be third star Jason Tatum, who's looking pretty good, but he was injured in the second game and missed the rest of the World Cup. There were only 3 players on Team USA who had ever been all-stars. The Americans were supposed to fix this in Tokyo. Steph Curry was going to play, Klay Thompson, Damian Lillard, James Harden, Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and Kyrie Irving too. Even LeBron expressed at least a passing interest. So imagine that team, by the way. That would just be only 3-pointers, and you would just have Kawhi and Anthony Davis getting rebounds pretty much. If anything, what happened in China last summer showed that the Americans need to send more talent to maintain Olympic gold, because many of the NBA's best foreign players showed up for their countries. So, for instance, Giannis played for Greece. The Gasols played for Spain. Granted, those players will be impacted by an NBA and Olympic schedule change too, as well. The Australians, the French, 2019 World Cup champion Spain, Turkey, Canada, Greece, and Greece with current NBA MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo also wouldn't have the same access to their NBA players. It would be a hard pill to swallow, says Joe Ingles of Australia, Utah Jazz forward Joe Ingles, who's played in every major tournament for his country since 2007. He spoke to Sam Amick for The Athletic. He said, I do understand on the flip side of that the NBA and the Utah Jazz pay my salary, and it's really good money, and I'm obviously obligated to be here. I absolutely love playing for Australia, and I would do anything to keep playing for Australia, representing my country. We obviously don't really know what that looks like yet. I hope the NBA season and the Olympics don't clash. So what should the Americans or any country with NBAers, but for the sake of discussion, let's stick to Team USA, do about this? The Americans qualified the 2019 World Cup by winning a bunch of games at various tournaments with a roster of G League players, and the Americans playing overseas, coached by Jeff Van Gundy. In 98, during the World Championship, a Team USA squad coached by Rudy Tomjanovich took third place with a roster of Americans playing professionally outside of the NBA because the league's lockout of its players. While not wanting to be quoted at length for the story, Van Gundy said the Olympics without NBA players would be incredibly disappointed, but I don't see USA Basketball using exclusively G League players. Colangelo is waiting on the NBA to make his decision, which, as you can see, could cause him to dramatically reshape Team USA Basketball. He's left to solving smaller puzzles, such as rebooking arenas for training camp and pre-Olympic games in 2021. As for his coach, he still expects Greg Popovich, who coached the team in China, was to coach the All-Americans in the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, but was also believed to be considering retirement at the end of the current NBA season. Colangelo told ESPN on Tuesday that both he and Pop would remain with the program through the Tokyo Olympics, no matter when that happens. Popovich comes back to the Spurs for another year and they make a deep playoff run in 2021. Well, Team USA will need a new coach, just in time for the Olympics. None of us have contracts. We have commitments. Pop is committed to do the Olympics, whether they're in 2020 or 2021. And then Colangelo politely hung up the phone. So this could screw everything up. Depending on how the NBA does their season, this could easily screw everything up for Team USA going into the new Olympics here. So it really depends on whether the NBA, how the NBA does it. If we start up again, my personal opinion, I think we should just do a couple warm-up games and then go straight into the playoffs. I think we should just do 5 to 10 games, just a warm-up games, and then go into the playoffs. I know I read that article out on Tuesday about those other plans that could happen, but those don't really make a lot of sense when you include the Olympics into the conversation. So I think maybe playing 5 to 10 games, warm-up games, and then going straight into the playoffs. Now the issue with that is, what about the teams that have no chance at making the playoffs, where you can still make those 5 to 10 games mean something, especially for the lower team, means something for draft capital and stuff like that. That's my best proposal. I don't really have another one. So there you have it. Now, when we return, there is now a threat to college football season, which I live in the South, and that would be an absolute tragedy. But there is a threat to the college football season. And we will find out who will make out better if we do not have a college football season. Who will make out better if they get an extra year to kind of practice and train for a football season when we return.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to Extreme Cage Fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So, unfortunately, there are rumors now that the college football season could be canceled as well at this point, which kind of makes sense because we're kind of drawing this out a little bit more. President Trump said that this should be over by Easter, which I don't necessarily agree with that. But if this unfortunately continues going on until August and September, we're going to have to postpone college football, which is one of the largest gatherings of people just in general. I mean, you have these football stadiums that hold 100,000 people, 80,000 people, 85,000 people. Like, that's a lot of people. And every Saturday you have hundreds of millions of people all gathered in together in very close proximity in football stadiums. So it would be very difficult to do that when we still are going through this conflict here against this coronavirus. So if that is true, then who would benefit the most from a lost football season? Now, of course, you look at teams, we look straight at the top. We look at teams like Alabama. They got They got Mac Jones. They got that quarterback that, I mean, he played a couple games, stuff like that. You still have a very young defense. Their young defense cost them some games last season. That young defense could, mature a little bit, one more year, get better through practice and stuff like that, and that young defense could be unstoppable in the next year. Now, it also depends on whether players who are eligible for the NFL draft, whether or not they stay or not, is a huge thing. So, for instance, Clemson, for another example, you have big-time guys like Amari Rodgers, you got Justin Ross, you got Trevor Lawrence, you got these big, and Travis Etienne, by the way. You have these big guys where if you lose a football season, I'm assuming the NCAA would give them another year of eligibility if there's a lost college football season. Would those guys come back? Would Travis Etienne come back? Would Trevor Lawrence come back just to play another college football season? That's a huge question that I just don't think it's possible. I mean, if you're Trevor Lawrence, you are a possible number one pick in the draft. Why would you come back to play college football after having a full year of rest, and then you can go into the NFL draft, go into the combine, and throw lights out at the combine, and then be like, yeah, draft me. And then you're completely healthy going into an NFL season. Travis Etienne, running backs, they don't have a huge lifespan, as we saw with Todd Gurley and David Johnson. So if you're a running back, you don't want to risk your NFL capital for another football season. Now, of course, it's already a shocker that he stayed for one more year, but he was apparently a second-round pick, a second-round draft grade, so he wants to be a first-round draft grade. So, I mean, losing a season probably won't help him there, but that's an interesting thing. What about our national champions, LSU Tigers? How would they benefit? Well, they have a new quarterback. They have some new pieces on offense. They have a new offense coordinator, or a new passing coordinator, I should say. New defensive coordinator. Stuff like that. They're going to have a pretty young team. Their defense should still be pretty amazing next year. How would they benefit from a year off? Well, that offense can kind of glue together a little bit more with the loss of Joe Brady. Maybe they implement more of Joe Brady's concepts. Well, I mean, make it better for the new quarterback to kind of grow in that aspect. I mean, losing Joe Burrow and Joe Brady is a huge hit. As we mentioned, Joe Burrow, he played lights out in every big game that he played in. And Joe Brady, you could tell that there was a huge difference between pre-Joe Brady and Joe Brady when you have Joe Brady. There's huge differences between those two seasons. Just looking at 2018 and 2019 LSU, there are huge differences. What about the smaller teams? What about the smaller teams, the Group of 5 teams? Would they benefit at all? I mean, you have these teams that, if they get an extra year of eligibility, you have these teams that are already going to be pretty good, that could get it better. I mean, Boise State, they're always on top of things. San Diego State has been a power recently. Air Force has also been a power. Although Air Force, they have military obligations, so football is not, obviously football is not their number one thing there. But so it's interesting to see the Group of 5 teams. Would their players jump ship if they have a chance of making the NFL? Will their seniors kind of... Also, how would this deal with recruiting? How would recruiting work? Because recruiting is suspended right now until April 15th, which we could see that suspended a little bit more. We are currently in a dead period where no teams can contact players, no players can contact teams, and etc. So we're in this dead period right now. How would no season affect recruiting? Will we still have a dead period for recruiting? Are these high school seniors just kind of going to be in limbo until signing day, and they just have to sign with whoever they think was the best person a full year ago, pretty much? So that recruiting is going to be highly affected. And then if you get the extra year of eligibility, these recruits coming in, they're not going to play for at least 2 years, because you have the seniors that were supposed to leave when you came in. They're supposed to be gone already. They're still there. So you got to wait for them to leave. Then you got to wait for the guys that were behind them to leave. And then you have your chance. So that could change a lot of recruits' decisions because a lot of recruits want to play now or play in the next year or so. So it could change their decision to go to a team that needs help more recently, stuff like that. It's a very interesting question. It's a very good brain exercise to really think of who would benefit more. So, I mean, a lot of teams had to cancel their spring practices because of the coronavirus, COVID-19. So teams that already got some spring practice in have an advantage if we do have a football season, because spring practice is very important to get the mid-year players in and get them accustomed to the system, accustomed to how college football works, how college practices work, and stuff like that. Now most teams don't have that anymore, so that's unfortunate. But and a lot of these teams don't get to work out at their facilities anymore. You have these nice facilities like at Clemson, Alabama, LSU, all these nice facilities that are not being used now. These huge weight rooms not being used now. Strength coaches are actually sending at-home workouts to their players because there's nothing else they can really do. You can't monitor their nutrition because most of the high-end football programs now have nutrition bars, and they have chefs, and they have a dining hall only to the football players that get them the right nutrition and the right stuff that they need, and then that's gone. So now the players, they're not being held accountable for anything. So if we do have footballs, that fall camp is going to suck. Because, I mean, even if you don't have summer workouts, if we still have football, so fall camps usually start around the end of July. End of July. That's about it. That's about right. Fall camp, which, by the way, is like a month of practice before an actual game starts at the end of July and then goes on to until the first game. And then once the first game happens, then you're into regular week of practice, or until school starts, and then you're in a regular week of practice. So then you're going to go from nothing, and you're just at home workouts. You got to prove. I'm sure they have some way to prove that they've been doing these at home workouts. I'm not really sure. So you got that. Then you go from that, no summer workouts, which I'm sure, once again, they'll send them summer workouts at home. You go from that, then straight into fall camp. If you have a fall camp, if you have practice at all, will we have practices if the football season is canceled? Will there be actually practices? I can still see practices being a thing, which would suck for, the support staff of all these teams, but I can see practices being a thing. But it would be a travesty, especially in the southern United States, if football is no longer a thing. I mean, there would be riots in the streets, I feel like. But I think LSU has a good chance at being the best equipped to getting an advantage out of an extra year, especially because they have a new quarterback, new everything pretty much. They lost a lot of coaches. So it could be a good year to kind of gel, get your identity back in place there. So when we return, Deshaun Watson tweeted out a cryptic tweet, and he tweeted out another one just today, which I'm not going to talk about, but Deshaun Watson tweeted out a cryptic tweet. We'll discuss that when we return.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So the big shock last week of the NFL free agency is that DeAndre Hopkins got traded from the Houston Texans. He got traded from the Houston Texans for David Johnson and a second-round pick. Well, technically the full trade was DeAndre Hopkins and a fourth-round pick to David Johnson. For David Johnson, a fourth-round pick and a second-round pick, so they got a second-round pick. But the Houston Texans, they still do not have a second-round pick. You traded your best receiver for a second-round pick, basically, for a aging running back who's been out of his prime for 3 years at least, who's had injury issues. So there was a lot of questions from fans, from analysts, from everybody, it seemed like, on Twitter about them trading DeAndre Hopkins, especially for the pennies that they traded him for. Now, of course, there were issues with him and Bill O'Brien, but as I've mentioned on the show before, I don't think Bill O'Brien is good enough to talk trash about DeAndre Hopkins, in my opinion. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Texans play this year, because they didn't really replace DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, I know they picked up another guy. I don't know his name off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, they still have need at wide receiver, because they picked up Randall Cobb, my bad. They Will Fuller, he needs to play a full year. He's in the final year of his rookie contract. His injury history makes his future with the team uncertain. He hasn't played a full year, but they need to replace DeAndre Hopkins. They have Randall Cobb. That provides the Texans with more reliable slot man, the Kiki Kuti, which is a fantastic name, but they could have picked up Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson with the Carolina Panthers, which I forgot to mention that when we were talking about the NFC South earlier. But they need a receiver. They need interior defensive line. They need edge rushers and stuff like that. So it's interesting to say the least. But then Deshaun Watson tweeted out this cryptic tweet. I don't know how I'm going to make it out of here clean. Can't even keep track of who plays for the other team. Iconic duos rip and split at the seams. Now, of course, this is a lyric of a song. I mean, let's go ahead and say that. This is not his actual words. He's taking this from a song. But they are big words, especially considering what happened here. The past few days going on. So I mentioned that Deshaun Watson is probably feeling a little lonely out there. You had DeAndre Hopkins. He went to the same college as you did. Not at the same time, but you had DeAndre Hopkins. He went to Clemson. They had that Clemson connection. He was your best receiver. You could just, if you were in doubt, just throw to DeAndre Hopkins. He's probably open, or he'll probably make some crazy catch. They seem like best buds and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden he's gone. You traded him for pennies. You got nothing back. You got a aging running back when you already have two other aging running backs on your team. And Bill O'Brien, add on to the fact that Bill O'Brien never really liked Deshaun. Bill O'Brien didn't want to draft Deshaun. Bill O'Brien didn't really want Deshaun to be the quarterback, as evident when Deshaun Watson didn't start until like halfway through the first season, his rookie year. There are legitimate issues that Bill O'Brien has had about Deshaun Watson, and then Deshaun Watson played. He played like Deshaun Watson plays, and then he won over the crowd. He won over ownership and stuff like that. So the fact of the matter is, Bill O'Brien has never really liked Deshaun Watson. So so you're Deshaun, your coach, and guy who just became GM, has said publicly that he didn't want to draft you. And then he trades away DeAndre Hopkins, your best receiver, your knight in shining armor, your safety net, trades him away. How do you think he's feeling right now? Now, there's been a lot of people on sports talk radio, sports, everything, that have been saying, Deshaun, you need to get out of there. You need to leave. Which, of course, those people are saying that from a perspective of, hey, the same perspective that I'm at is like, hey, Bill O'Brien doesn't like you, man. You need to get out of there. That team is nothing. You could argue Deshaun Watson is the main reason that Bill O'Brien is still there, because they went 9-7, I believe, this past year. They won the division. Will anything get him fired, though? Will anything get him fired? We have no idea. But at the end of the day, the Texans have to sign Tunsil and Watson to extensions. They got Laramie Tunsil, of course. If they don't, then I don't know what that Texan team is going to look like. But will trading DeAndre Hopkins affect his willingness to sign long-term with the Texans? Of course. Watson is probably not thrilled to lose the wideout he's targeted more than twice as many times as other receivers, but will it ultimately lead to him refusing to sign an extension with the Texans and one day hit the free agent market? Well, that's kind of up to debate. So, my thing is, if he decides to not sign an extension, he's probably still going to get franchise tagged. He's going to get franchise tagged at least twice. So, I feel like, because he is a good player, unless Bill O'Brien is definitely wants him gone. But, it's going to be interesting to see that. So the price of Watson's services figures to go up with time if he chooses to play through a fifth-year option and 2 franchise tags before reaching free agency in 2024. That's a long time to wait. And Watson's strong public backings of Bill O'Brien, Deshaun has said he likes Bill O'Brien and stuff like that, indicate he'll support his coach rather than cause drama. You might have doubt, but I don't, Watson said when asked about Bill O'Brien after divisional round loss to the Chiefs. He said, I love that man. I'll always play hard for that man. You all can say what you want to say in the media, but as long as I'm at quarterback, he's cool with me. He's got my heart. He's going to get my 110% every time I step on the field. You all can say whatever, but I'm going to always root for that man and play hard for him. So, that's a little different than what he kind of tweeted, but you could say he tweeted that just because the iconic duo did disband. It did split. It could be a shot at DeAndre Hopkins because split at the seams means not a good cut, something like that. It could be that. It could be a shot at Bill O'Brien. There's a lot of conjecture going on, and it's mostly because there's no sports to talk about, so we're going to talk about everything in between. But Deshaun Watson, will he return to the Texans? That's the big issue right now, because the Texans, they're making a lot of questionable moves. I think Bill O'Brien needs to get out of there because there is no reason he should be the GM and the head coach. That's just my opinion. But the Texans still have a lot of time. We still have free agency going on. They still have a lot of time to make more dumb trades to get aging players that don't make sense. I don't know. But they missed out on Stephon Diggs. They missed out on Robbie Anderson, which would have been a pretty good person to get in there. They could still get Sammy Watkins, kind of build up that Clemson connection that Deshaun had with DeAndre Hopkins, stuff like that. So we're going to have to wait to see. We're going to have to wait and see here about that. So we'll see how that turns out. Deshaun Watson is a really good quarterback. Just throwing that out there. He is a very team player guy. He does whatever it takes for the team to win. That's why he doesn't complain about much things, and that's why this tweet's kind of weird to me. But he doesn't complain. He doesn't complain at all. He'll continue to he'll continue playing for the team like nothing is going on, like there's no drama at all. But I just like to remind everybody that this is only happening. We're only talking about this because there's no sports to talk about. The little petty dramas like this are going to be coming up all the time because there's nothing else to talk about. Everybody's just kind of stuck in their houses. I'm stuck in my house right now doing nothing. So we'll see how that all turns out. So Deshaun Watson Cryptic tweet. Will he leave the Texans at the end of this year, which is the end of his contract, or will he get franchise tagged like 5 times and then never leave probably Bill O'Brien won't let him leave. I do think Bill O'Brien will probably get fired this year if they don't make the playoffs, which, I mean, the Colts got Phillip Rivers, so that's up in the air right now. But when we return, we'll talk about the NHLPA. They gave out an update about possibility of resuming the NHL season this summer.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
So there's one league I have not been talking about. I talked about the MLB because of investigations of the Boston Red Sox. I've talked about college football because they might cancel the season. I've talked about the NBA because they canceled mid-season and we don't know what's going on with them. I've talked about the NFL because that's pretty much the only thing going on right now. So let's head on over to hockey. Hockey, the sport I tried to talk about, but I'm not very good at it, but I try anyways. So the NHL, they also had to postpone their season. They had to suspend their season. They were in the middle of their season. They did the All-Star break in January, and now they were gearing up for the playoffs, which start in like April, I think, or May, one of the two. But they were in their final 10 to 20 games or something like that in the NHL. The trade deadline already passed, stuff like that. So the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs are one of the most gruesome playoffs to play through. You can ask any hockey player about that. It is one of the hardest things to play in because you're playing hockey, which is already a very demanding sport physically, and then you're playing it every other night, pretty much. Every other night for 7 games in a row. And then you got to turn around and go right back into it for the second round, and then turn around and go right back into it for the third round, and then go right back around for the championship. So the Stanley Cup playoffs are easily, and it's also just wild. It's kind of random if you want to go that route. It's a very random tournament. I mean, it's for the best trophy in sports, but it's also one of the most random tournaments out there. So the NHL, they suspended their season halfway through as well, and we're reaching upon when the playoffs would start soon. So how would the NHL deal with this when they come back? It's kind of the similar conversation as the NBA, but we have the NHL Players Association Executive Director Donald Furr, who had an appearance on a podcast, and he gave some insight to what they're thinking. So the NHL Players Association and the NHL are working in lockstep with each other to navigate the uncharted waters presented by COVID-19 pandemic that forged the stoppage of league play. So the players believe that whatever steps are taken to try and salvage what remains of the 1920 season, or having a 2020 Stanley Cup playoff tournament, having a full 82-game schedule in place for 2021 season is critical. So Furr described the unprecedented working relationship as practical and businesslike, which is very interesting because most of the time when I read articles like this, it's always not that. So he said there is no posturing, there is no attempt so far to take advantage of this or that or the other. It's just all right. What can we do when? And then the backdrop, of course, being that you want to maintain to the greatest extent you can, or put it another way, you don't want to put in jeopardy the health and safety of the players, the NHL employees, the arena staff, fans, and all the rest of that. But practical and businesslike is the way that I would put it, and at this point, I would expect that to continue. We talk at one level or another to NHL people several times a day, every day. So while Furr confirmed the talks aimed at hammering out a new collective bargaining agreement have been put aside as there are more immediate things on the agenda. He did suggest that this journey into the unknown with the league may have helped pave the way to not just a new labor agreement, but also forge a new relationship with the league. I hope it all impacts it positively. We'll have to see. First said Wednesday, the old joke about labor relations is that you're in a marriage, but you can't get a divorce. And sometimes what that means is that you can feel free a little bit to fight harder because you know the other party is still going to be there when you're done. On the other hand, when you go through trying and difficult times, maybe it can create bonds that weren't there before. So this is a conversation from the podcast. I'm reading off a transcript here, and I'll read off as much of it as I can. So let's dive straight in. The last report we had, there were 2 NHL players who tested positive for coronavirus, both members of the Ottawa Senators. Is there an update on that number? Can you describe where you're at in terms of players getting tested or wanting to get tested? Don first said, it basically is pretty simple. I don't know of more than 2, but you should understand that my knowledge in many cases, will lag behind something that happens. Because if somebody tests positive, they go through the medical protocols, they notify family, they do all that, and then eventually the reports come back to the league and then us. It doesn't take very long, but it's not instantaneous. In terms of players being tested, I think we're in pretty much the same boat everybody else is, which is if you become the symptomatic or there are other reasons discovered during a medical evaluation that you should be tested, you get tested. Otherwise, that is not the case. We can just hope that the self-quarantine and other measures that have been taken will be sufficient. So, Don, you've seen a lot in your day between your long tenure at the head of the baseball union and, of course, your time now in hockey in the same role. There have been strikes, there have been lockouts, and a lot of tense moments in your career. How could you even compare what you're living right now to all that? He said, well, you can't. To do it is an exercise in comparing not apples to oranges, but apples to tractors. What? It's that much different. We're living through something that nobody in the Western world has seen for at least 100 years with the Spanish flu. The societies we live in are vastly different now. They're much more fluent. There's much more ease of communication, much more interpersonal contact, vastly less of an agricultural sector. Plus, we have instantaneous communication. And so, as you can see, when somebody like this starts and spreads, something like this starts and spreads, it can spread worldwide. All you can do is take the appropriate measures as directed and explained by the public health authorities and try to contain and limit, and then get back to normal as soon as that can be done. So he mentioned communication. I'm curious what it's been like for you to keep players involved and engaged in the discussions you're having with the league and medical officials to keep them up to date, and maybe what you're hearing from players in terms of their ideas on how things could unfold or should unfold. Can you walk us through how you're staying in contact with a group of about 720 people? This is a pretty long response, so I'll try to keep it short. I'll cut it off if I have to. When you count people that are hurt, it's a little larger than that, and we're also in contact with some former players and NHL players who were temporarily in minor leagues and all of their agents and so forth. It's pretty easy to describe. It's what I think all of your listeners should expect. Everybody's got cell phones, everybody's got email, everybody's got text messages, so we start with that. We, along with every other institution in North America, are burning up the wires with conference calls. I, the former players on staff, and the number of other people are literally in constant contact with players. I'm on the phone anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day between conference calls, calls with staff, talking to Gary Bettman, NHL commissioner, or people at the league office, and obviously with players. And you want to make sure people are up to date. You want to make sure that you get questions answered to the extent that you can identify a problem or a question before it becomes acute. So we'll cut that off right there. So far it's just basically whatever. So you talk about some of the questions players have had for you, many of which don't have answers, but my sense is that players have also offered their own thoughts and suggestions perhaps on how things might look if the game is able to resume, whether to play the regular season games, what a playoff grid might look like. Is there any way to tell right now whether there's any type of consensus on what the players favor in terms of how a playoff grid might look like? then says that the answer is yes, but it's not very specific. There's a lot of speculation players are engaging in. What would it look like if we were able to resume on this date, or 10 days later, or 21 days after that? What would it look like if we had to eliminate the rest of the regular season so that you didn't have the normal number of games played to determine who the playoff teams are? How do you treat the teams that were not, as of the date we stopped playing, in the top 16? They wouldn't have qualified for the playoffs, but yet they still had a chance to do it. And as we all know, things change a lot in the past few games of the year and many seasons. And you would try and figure out a way to adapt to that. I guess the best answer I can give you is that most players would want to complete it, would want to have a Stanley Cup awarded, provided that it can be a tournament which is fair under all circumstances and that everybody can be proud of participating in. So to follow up, I assume, and I know it's dangerous to assume, but just like Bill Daly said, having a full season next year is very important to the league. Can't imagine it wouldn't be to your side as well, given that, just to be blunt, the players are getting paid during the regular season and not the playoffs. Furr said, well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that obviously you want to complete return to normalcy if you can get it next year. It doesn't mean that you couldn't alter the dates of next year's season a little bit in order to accommodate playing late this year going forward. But remember, while players get paychecks over the course of the regular season, their salaries could include revenue that's earned during the postseason, so the two are not divorced. So that's basically it. Players want a fair way to get into the playoffs. They want a fair way to get the 16 playoff teams there. So it's going to be just like the NBA. It's going to be very interesting to see how the NHL does it. I bet they're both going to do pretty similar things because, I mean, they're not similar sports, but they have similar schedules. They both play 82 games in their seasons, and then they have a tournament. So it's going to be very interesting. But when we come back, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about our random sport of the day, which is netball.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and one championship. We got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
So our random sport of the day today is a sport that is an Olympic sport. It's an official Olympic sport. It's in the Olympics. But I mean, it has been in the Olympics. I remember when I was a kid, we bought a book that it had like a AstroTurf cover for some reason, and it was like the Olympic sports. It was every Olympic sport that's ever been played in the Olympics. Oh, hit my mic. It's every sport that's been played in the Olympics. So I looked through it and I found a weird sport. It looked like basketball, but it didn't have a backboard. So I was like, what is this? Netball? What is that? So, I mean, I've been kind of interested in it ever since then. Netball is a weird sport. Just going to lay it out there. Like I said, it is like basketball, except there is not a backboard, and there's a bunch of different things going on there. So if you look up a picture of it, like I'm looking up right now, you have like the pole, and then it's literally just the rim and a net of a basketball goal. There's no backboard at all. So how does this work? Well, it is a ball sport played by two teams of 7 players. It's most popular in Commonwealth nations, specifically in schools, and it's predominantly played by women. According to INF, netball is played by more than 20 million people in more than 80 countries. There are major domestic leagues in the sport include Netball Super League in Great Britain, Suncorp Super Netball in Australia, ANZ Premiership in New Zealand. 4 major competitions take place internationally: the quadrennial World Netball Championships, the Commonwealth Games, and yearly Quad Series and Fast 5 Series. In '95, netball became an International Olympic Committee recognized sport. but unfortunately it's not been played in the Olympics actually, but it is a recognized sport, so I'm mistaken by that. But I mean, that book would recognize sports. I could have sworn I've seen netball played in the Olympics before, but whatever. Games are played on a rectangular court with raised goal rings at each end. Each team attempts to score goals by passing a ball down the court and shooting it through its goal ring. Wow, that sounds familiar, right? It sounds like basketball. Players are assigned specific positions, which define their roles within the team and restrict their movement to certain areas of the court. So this is where it gets different. Each player has a position, and that position you are kind of stuck on that side of the court or wherever. Each team, lost my place here. The winning team is the one that scores the most goals, of course. Netball games are 60 minutes long. Variations have been developed to increase the game's pace and wider appeal to a wider audience. Its development derived from early versions of basketball, began in England in the 1890s. By 1960, international playing rules had been standardized for the game, and International Federation of Netball and Women's Basketball, later renamed the International Netball Federation, the INF, was formed. As of 2019, the INF comprised of more than 70 national teams organized in 5 global regions. So, what is the history of netball? It emerged from early versions of basketball and evolved into its own sport as the number of women participating in sports increased. Basketball was invented in 1891 by James Naismith in the United States. The game was initially played indoors between 2 teams of 9 players using association football that was thrown into a closed-end peach baskets. Naismith's game spread quickly across the United States and variations of the rules soon emerged. Physical education instructor Senda Berenson developed modified rules for women in 1892. These eventually gave rise to women's basketball. Around this time, separate intercollegiate rules were developed for men and women. Various basketball rules converged into a universal set in the United States. Martina Bergman Osterberg introduced a version of basketball in 1893 to her female students at the Physical Training College in Hampstead, London. The rules of the game were modified at the college over several years. The game moved outdoors and was played on grass. The baskets were replaced by rings that had nets, and in 1897 and 1899, rules for women's basketball in the United States were incorporated. Osterberg's new sport acquired the name netball. The first codified rules of netball were published in 1901 by the League Association, later the Physical Education Association of the United Kingdom. From England, netball spread to other countries in the British Empire. Variations of the rules and even names for the sport arose in different areas. Women's outdoor basketball arrived in Australia around 1900 and in New Zealand in 1906, while netball was being played in Jamaican schools by 1909. So, netball, it was originally mostly a women's sport. It is now. They have intergender leagues and stuff like that. So, let's look at the description and rules. They're like I said, the different positions are going to be kind of difficult for me to describe because it is kind of weird, it is kind of funky, but you can look up a YouTube video if you really want to. The objective of a game is to score more goals than the opposition, which is fairly basic. Goals are scored when a team member positioned in the attacking shooting circle shoots the ball through the goal ring. The goal rings are 380 millimeters, 15 inches in diameter, and 10 feet tall. Have no backboards. A 16-foot radius semicircle shooting circle is an area at the end of each court. Think of the perimeter where the three-point line would be, but it's way shorter. The goalposts are located within the shooting circle. Each team defends one shooting circle and attacks the other. The netball court is 100 feet long, 50 feet wide, and divided lengthwise into thirds. The ball is usually made of leather or rubber, measures to 27-28 inches in circumference, and weighs 397 to 454 grams, which is 14 to 16 ounces. A normal game consists of 4 15-minute quarters, sounds like basketball, and can be played outdoors or in a covered stadium. Each team is allowed 7 players on the court. Each player is assigned a specific position, which limits their movement to a certain area of the court. A bib worn by each player contains a 1 or 2 letter abbreviation indicating this position. Only 2 positions are permitted in the attacking a shooting circle and can therefore shoot for a goal. Similarly, there are only 2 positions are permitted in the defensive shooting circle, and they try to prevent the opposition from shooting goals. The other players are restricted to 2/3 of the court, with the exception of the center, who may move anywhere on the court except for the shooting circle. So think of the center as like, I guess, the star player, I guess. I don't know. At the beginning of every quarter and after a goal has been scored, play starts with a player in the center position passing the ball from the center of the court. These center passes alternate between the teams, regardless of which team scored the last goal. When the umpire blows the whistle to restart play, 4 players from each team can move into the center third to receive the pass. The center pass must be caught or touched in the center third. The ball is then moved up and down the court through passing and must be touched by a player in each adjacent third of the court. Players can hold the ball for only 3 seconds at any time. It must be released before the foot they were standing on, and then it touches the ground again. Contact between players is only permitted if it does not impede an opponent or the general play. When defending a pass or shot, players must be at least 35 inches away from the player with the ball. If illegal contact is made, the player who contacted cannot participate in play until the player taking the penalty has passed or shot the ball. If the ball is held in 2 hands and either dropped or a shot at goal is missed, the same player cannot be the first to touch it unless it first rebounds off the goal. So there you go. That's a lot of random stuff. I'm actually going to look up a video real quick and kind of just describe what's going on. So yeah, they have different positions that can only stay at certain spots of the court. So let's see. I'm watching the netball game, how to play rules and rules introduction. Wow, this court is weird. It's just weird seeing it without a... So the best way I can describe it so far is it's a mix of basketball and handball. Because if you ever played handball, you know, or ultimate frisbee, I should say, if you touch the disc or you touch the ball, you kind of have to stay in place. It's kind of like that because there's no dribbling, nothing like that. They're kind of playing with those kind of rules, and then they shoot it into the net if you're within the shooting circle. Man, this is interesting. I mean, yeah, there's a center thing, and then, man, this is an odd sport, but I like it. I mean, it looks fun. I would like to play it at one point. I think the positions will be a little weird, but I mean, there's a bounce pass, so you can bounce pass it. Got a little scrap right there. I don't know, this video I'm watching, they're playing in a completely green gym, so it just feels like a TV studio, pretty much. But, so yeah, you can have 2 players in the shooting circle, and those are the only 2 people that can shoot it, who can actually score. Everybody else kind of just runs around and passes, so I guess you get the best shooters in the shooting circle, and then, yeah, I don't know, man. It's an interesting sport. I implore you to look it up and at least watch it a little bit because it is interesting. I don't know if it's interesting enough to replace basketball, but netball it's an interesting sport. So that's it for us here in the Thursday edition of the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening, everybody. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see y'all on Sunday. If you like this podcast, rate, review us. And we will see you on Sunday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.